Hello, this is the Bite Weasel, and in this video, we'll be yet again continuing work on our Roblox Tycoon game. This time, we'll be figuring out how to save and load the game state. So, what do I mean by that? Well, if you've been following along with the previous videos, you've probably seen this a whole bunch. But whenever you start the game, what happens is our entire tycoon restarts from scratch. So, it doesn't matter how many of these different things I buy, um, how much money I end up with whenever I quit the game, uh, it starts again. So let's see, I have 100, almost 200 money. I bought the walls and I bought that dropper. If I quit and I start again, oh, I'm back to the beginning. And this is really unfortunate because it's um, one of the trademarks of a low quality tycoon game, right? You get people to join your game finally. They're busy, they're having fun, they're earning a lot of money, they're unlocking all sorts of stuff. Then they have to drop off for one reason or another. So they quit the game, they go do whatever they do in their real lives, and then they come back later excited to continue their tycoon, and oh, they're back to square one. That's a bad feeling. We don't want people coming to our game and wasting their time and then feeling bad when they rejoin. And that will give us down votes. We don't want those. We want good up votes. So let's figure out how we can sort of save and load this game state. So no matter how many times I come back and I quit, I'm still going to be in the same place every time. So the way that you handle loading and saving in Roblox is a thing called the data store. And if we switch over to our factory sort of script here, I can show you what that looks like. So much like you get the player service or you get the replicated storage service or any other service, there is a data store service. So we can grab that in the exact same way that we grab everything else. Get service, data store service. And the data store service has a bunch of functions that you can call, one of which is get data store. Here it is. And with this one, you have to send in the name of the data store that you would like to get or create one if it isn't already there. So for example, you could say player data. So what this would do, this function call here would basically ask Roblox data store service to create a backend sort of server storage area named player data that is unique to your game. Okay? So if you created a second tycoon that had a different name, different theme, and you used the same line of code, that underlying data store would be different because it's unique per game. So that's something to remember. And with that data store, we can grab it and, set it to a local variable. And then that data store allows you to uh, get things, and it allows you to set things. Uh, you can imagine it similar to how you get and set values or attributes or tags, in Roblox itself, except this stuff is stored separately to your game so that next time you can reload that data and it will be stored even though they exited the game, right? The problem with the data store service is that it's kind of complicated. So I've shown you like the very basics. You get the data store, you set, and you get things. But there are some rules with the data store service that Roblox enforces, such as you cannot call it too many times because it would overload their systems. And you have to be careful of data corruption, and you have to be careful of interruptions between calling a set and it not actually making it to the Roblox storage side. So it's kind of complicated to figure out. So you can do it manually like this, writing your own code, getting the data store, getting and setting values, and figuring it out like that. You certainly can. But that's not what we want to do today. Instead, we're going to use a library that sort of controls all of that difficult logic for us. Now, there are plenty of different data store libraries that you can choose from. One of the favorite ones that I have is called ProfileService. So if you go to this URL, which I hopefully link in the description of the video, you'll be able to grab a copy of this profile service. And if we go to tutorial setting up, it should tell us how to do that. So you can get the library model from here, which takes us to the Roblox Creator Hub. And as long as you're signed in, this button here where it says try in studio for me will probably say something like get model for you. The reason mine is different is because I already have this model downloaded to my toolbox. So click this button on yours if it says get model, and then switch back on over to your Roblox Studio. And then you need to open your toolbox, which is where the thing gets put. So go over to View, go over to Toolbox. And then from here, you want to click My Inventory, which is the second tab. Then from there, choose My Models, and you should see Profile Service if you've added it correctly. And you can just click this. And that ends up putting this script inside your workspace. So the first thing you want to do is move this script from your workspace to somewhere else, like your server script service. And the thing you'll notice about this script is it has the same icon as our helpers script. And that's because it is not a server script, it's not a local script, it is in fact a module script, which means the script on its own doesn't actually do anything. Something else has to require it first, much like with our helper script. So now we have that profile service. Let's figure out how to set that up. The easiest way to figure it out is to go back to the profile service website and go to basic usage. And this tutorial gives you all the code you need to be able to start using this profile service library. It's pretty straightforward, and there are a lot of comments in here that sort of explain everything, but I'm going to show you how to do it piece by piece so that we can sort of understand what's going on. So the first thing I'm going to do, though, even though I have this profile service library, I don't want to touch that script. Instead, I'm going to make my own script that sort of handles a wrapper around it for things that I want to do. So we're going to have our own module script, and we're going to call it something slightly more simple to use than profile service. We're just going to call it data. So now we have a brand new script that we can use that is going to do all of that profile service interaction for us. And then when we want to use it in the rest of our code, we will require the data script. So the first thing we want to do is require the profile service script from in here. So we can say local profile service equals require. If you recall from our previous video, this is the keyword that allows you to load a module script from another script. And we will require the get service, the server script service. And from there, we want profile service. So this has required the profile service script and put it into a item named profile service. Pretty straightforward. To use the profile service library, you need to require it. That makes sense. Now, the first thing that you're going to want to do after you've required your profile service is you're going to want to actually get a profile store from the profile service. This is very similar to how the get data store sort of function worked. You give it a name, and that will be the underlying name of the database storage area that Roblox creates for you. So we will use player data right now. Now, unlike the data store, you have to provide a second parameter here. And that second parameter is basically going to describe the data that you want to store in that table or in that database where it gets stored. So we're going to take their example, and you'll see me copy and paste from their tutorial a lot, which means that you can also do that when you come to do it. And basically, this is going to be a table that represents the type of data that we want to store into that database. So profile template is the name of it, and you can see we have cache, we have a table of items, and then we have a number that is login times. And so depending on what your game is doing and how much different data you want to store, this is the sort of object that you would need to customize. So for us, we don't really need this. All we need is cache, which we're going to call money because that sort of is what we've named our money throughout the rest of the code. And for items, we're going to use a list of unlocked items. So really, when a person plays the game, we're going to store how much money they've made, and we're going to store which of those Tycoon buttons they've already purchased and unlocked the item for. So that will be the data that we store in our service here. So we create this sort of object that describes the default values of all these things so that people are going to join the game, they're going to have 0 money, and they're not going to have unlocked anything. And that is what we'll pass into this get profile store function. So we're going to have a database named player data, and it's going to be passed this as the default values. Okay, cool. So that's good. The next thing that we want to do is create these profiles when a player is added and get rid of the profiles when a player is removed. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. So similar to how we've had in our other scripts, a table that stores the things relevant to this script. So sellers stores sellers, droppers stores droppers, buttons stores buttons. Thing relevant to this script that we're going to store is our table of profiles. And then in our exported module, we're going to essentially want 2 functions. We're going to want a function that we call when a player is added, and will be passed in a player. Oops, sorry, it needs to say player added equals function that takes in a player. And we're also going to have a second module function called player removed, which will take in a player, the player that left the game. This is slightly different to how the profile service template document works. And I think that's okay. You don't have to copy this word for word. Once you understand what it's doing, you can sort of apply your own style to this and make sure that it works for the game that you're making. So you can definitely lift all of this code and just use it as is. But for us, we're going to work slightly differently with it so we can use our own patterns. But essentially, this is what happens when a player gets added. So we'll paste that code in, and then I'll sort of explain it as we update it and change it. Ooh, that's interesting. Copy, paste. Okay, so we'll paste it in, and I'll sort of go through it line by line so you can see what it's doing. So when a player joins the game, a player is added, we'll end up calling this function from our existing factory script. But what will happen is we need to get a profile for this player. Okay, so you use the profile store, which we already got up here, and the backing data store for that thing is called player data. And then we'll load a profile from it. So load profile async, and then you need to pass in a unique identifier for this player. So we already know about a unique identifier for players because we use it to assign ownership of a factory. It's the user ID. Now the load profile function wants a string, and this is a number. So we'll just create a string by combining player underscore and then their user ID as their unique entry into that store table. Okay, so that will be now our profile object. We've loaded the profile from the profile store. Then we need a guard check, which is what this is doing. So, you should be familiar with this by now, but we've done a bunch of these before. If not something, then return early. And with this data, we also want to do the same thing, which is what they're doing here, but they're doing it in the if-else method, which we've talked about before, and we'll sort of do it in the opposite way. So if there's no profile, so for some reason, the profile failed to load, like some data corruption happened, or Roblox was unable to connect to its database because something was down or broken, then what do we want to do? Well, we want to abandon the rest of our code. We don't want to continue. And the way that they do it in the profile service tutorial is that they just kick the player. So if you cannot find the profile, you just kick the player, which is fine. I guess that works. If the profile can't be loaded, we don't really want a player playing the game because they'll not be able to save any of their state. So we'll just get them to exit and we will um, tell them a nice friendly message. So player kick will say, unable to load profile data, please try again. Okay? So they'll be kicked from the game if we can't find their data, but at least they'll get a message that says, please try again. So hopefully they'll try it again and Roblox this time will load stuff. Okay? So if there's no profile, we kick them from the game and then we return early. So at this point, we know that we do have a valid profile for this player. We don't need this if statement anymore, and we don't need the else because we've already dealt with that in our guard check. So the next thing they do is they use the profile and they make sure that the user ID is associated with it via this add user ID function. Now, this is already going to be associated with it anyway because we're using the user ID for the name, but just for extra protection, they do it here. And the comment that they use is GDPR compliance. Now, if you're not familiar with what GDPR is, it's basically a law in the European Union that states any person who has an online presence must be able to request removal of all their data from a particular company. So in this case, someone playing Roblox decides that they don't want to play Roblox ever again, and they don't want their data stored in any of their Roblox servers. They can request from Roblox to remove all their data. And Roblox must comply because they are compliant with the GDPR law because they sell stuff in Europe, I guess. So for GDPR compliance, we'll just make sure that this is there. And very occasionally, if you've published a game to Roblox and people have played it, Roblox may send you a message saying, hey, this user ID has requested all data removal, so please remove them from your games. And to do that, ProfileService has a fancy function you can use to say, hey, delete this particular player's data from everything so that I'm compliant with GDPR. So we'll leave that there. And then the next function that they call is reconcile. And it explains what it does here. Fill in missing variables from the profile template. And this is optional, I guess, but we kind of always want to do this. And I'll tell you why. So the way that profile service works is when you load a profile service, if it cannot find something, it makes the profile template as their default data. So even if the player only just joined for the first time ever, you will get back a profile that has money set to 0 and unlocked items set to an empty table, which is great. But what happens if that guy plays the game for a bit, grabs some money, unlocks some items, and then quits? And before he comes back, you've updated your game and added a whole bunch of new stuff, like bonus items or, unlock mechanisms or something else that you've stored into the profile table. Next time that same person rejoins and we load their data, they're only going to have the old system that was stored, right? They're not going to have this new item because that's brand new between when they logged off and when they've just logged in. So reconcile basically says, okay, here's the old data that I had that was just loaded. If there's anything in the profile template that I don't have, let's add that in now. So after this call, you can guarantee that every profile that you've loaded will be in your current format. And that's really handy for when you're doing updates between people logging in and logging out. Okay, so this is very important. Make sure you use that there. And then the next thing they have is an event handler that listens for the release of the profile. So you can think of a releasing the profile as destroying the profile, the same way that you would destroy a button or destroy what else do we destroy in this game? Products, I guess. In a similar way, you can listen to the release or destroy event of this profile and make sure that it's not stored in our big list of profile tables. So you can get rid of it And then in the unlikely event that the profile was loaded on a different Roblox server, we can just make sure that this player is removed from the game, right? So you don't, if the profile gets destroyed for one reason or another, we want the player associated with the profile to be out of the game. Okay, it's very unlikely that this actually does anything, because normally a player leaves and that will cause the profile to get released. And so player kick won't do anything because the player's already left. You don't have to worry about it too much, but we do want to make sure that once we've got rid of a profile, we no longer have the player if they somehow manage to stay in the game. The next thing they do is this weird check where they see if the player that we got passed in, that is being added, is part of the player's service. Now, this is because there are some random situations where a player can join your game and then quickly quit, or they quickly switch to another server, or they join the same game on two different machines, and somehow Roblox gets sort of confused, and you have a player, but they're not actually part of your player service hierarchy. And if that happens, we want to release the profile and make sure that they've gone away, right? So we'll change this into a guard check in a similar pattern to our others. Instead of if else's, we'll say if the player is not a descendant of this, profile.release, and then return, right? Return early, much like we do with these things. Now it's going to complain because it doesn't know what the player's service is. So we can sort of take the get service call that we already have and put it at the top of the file here so we get the player's service. Okay, so if the player has somehow logged into the game but is not actually in the hierarchy because they've also quickly left or a different device has logged on or whatever, just release the profile and quit. And you'll remember, once you release the profile, we're going to delete it from our table and also kick the player. So we know that in this unlikely event that it happens, at least the player isn't in some corrupted state. They've just left and they can always rejoin. Okay? So it's kind of complicated, but it's all there to protect the data integrity of your saved state. You don't want some hackers or some people with slow internet or just a bad day for Roblox causing your game to get corrupted because one person somehow ended up there with two different profiles. So this is all protecting that. And you can definitely just follow their tutorial, or you can follow this video and get the same sort of techniques every single time. Now, once we're at this point, we can safely store that profile into our table that we can then use later on, right? And then they have a comment saying, hey, you should do something with the profile because it's ready. But at this point, the profile is ready. So I know that was complicated. Certainly take time to rewatch the video again, listen to my explanations, and read their documentation. But it's not too bad once you understand what's happening. You load the profile. If it didn't work, you kick the player. Otherwise, you listen to the profile getting released. And if that happens, delete it from the table. If the player somehow got corrupted, we release the profile, which will also kick the player. And in the very end, if we've finished all of that stuff and it worked, then we are ready to be able to use this profile for the player stored here. Now, in a similar mechanism, when you get removed from the game, you can imagine that we have to do something very similar. So when a player is removed from the game, we get their profile, and then assuming that we have one, we release it. So we'll change this into a guard check. If they don't have a profile, then just return early because it's not valid. Otherwise, release that profile. Okay? Now, releasing of the profile will remove it from the table and kick the player, but they're already being removed anyway, so this shouldn't do anything. Cool. So now we have a mechanism that will load and save data to a profile. The profile is going to look like this. It's going to have money and it's going to have unlocked items. And the rest of the logic for queuing things and retrying and making sure stuff works with the actual data store is all handled for us under the covers. And this is sort of template code that once you've written it once, you can copy and paste it into any new game that you make because it's always going to be the same. Okay, the one final thing that we want for our special data sort of script that we have is an ability to get this profile, right? Because right now we can call player added and it will create the profile. We can call player removed and it will delete the profile, but we do not have a mechanism to get the profile outside of this script. So we'll create a new function and we'll say get. We could just call it get. Why not? Function, and we'll pass in a player that is of type player. And basically what we're going to do is, sort of suggested it for us. We get the profile from the player. If there's not a profile, then we'll return nothing. Otherwise, we will return the profile. Makes sense? It's pretty straightforward. But the thing about this profile is the profile object itself is not this data. Okay, so this is something to be aware of. The profile object itself has a whole bunch of different functions on. It's the thing that you can call add user ID or reconcile or listen to release. That's the profile item. The actual thing inside the profile that you want is called data. Okay, so the profile itself is this object that ProfileService gives you, but the actual access to the underlying objects that you want to store is under the .data. Okay, so whenever we call data, which is going to be the name of our script, .get, pass in a player, we'll return the actual data from that profile. And let's show you what that looks like. So in our factories main script, so this is where we really add players and we clone plots and do all that stuff. Let's get access to that data. So we're going to say local data equals require, much like you would require the helper script, and we've done it before to require the profile service script in the data script. We get the server script storage. We say .data, which is the name of our helper script. And now we have this data script, the data module. And so in the player added function, we're going to want to make sure that we call player added and pass in the player. That will create our profile. And then in player removing, we definitely want to do the player remove function. Maybe I should have called it removing to match, but that's okay. So that will delete the profile once they're leaving the game. Cool, so now we've got the ability to create a profile and release a profile. How do we actually use it? Well, it should be pretty straightforward. Let's start by loading and saving the money value. So here, right now, we create the leader stats, which is that leaderboard thing. We create a money value, which ends up being that column. And this value we then set and change when we sell something and when we buy something. So let's just, instead of it always setting it to 0, let's say data, which is our module script, get player dot and money. So that will be our value. Now, one of the annoying things here is that when I said dot, I didn't actually know what I was getting, right? I know that in my head, this returns that profile template thing, which should have a money and it should have an unlocked items, but I don't get any help there. So we can fix that by going back to our data. We can go over to our data module script, and we can basically tell Roblox Studio, hey, instead of returning the type of any, because you don't really know what profile data is, I'm going to tell you what this function actually returns. So we can use a colon the same way that we do here to say the player variable is of type player. We can say the function is going to return something that matches the type of this, which is our profile template. Now, this type of is sort of a keyword that says turn this item into a type for Roblox Studio to understand. Okay, so now we've said, okay, whenever they call get, they're going to return something that looks like a profile template. Means if I go back here and I do a dot, we now get nice IntelliSense that tells us, okay, the data has either money on it or unlocked items, and we want to use money. So now we're going to have loaded whatever money came from the data store. And that's really good, but we have no way of saving that money yet. And so what we could do is anywhere we change this value, so such as in the sellers where we change the money, or perhaps in the buttons where we buy something and change the money, we could add a call here to set the data. But a slightly easier way, so that we don't have to think about it, is to add an event on the money object itself. So the money is like a number value, and number values have a get property changed signal event. And you can say what property you want to look at. Well, it's usually always going to be the value property for one of these number values. Whenever this value changes, we want to hear an event. So let's connect up to it and let's make a new function. And whenever that happens, what we want to do is use the data. This isn't quite right. Use our data module script to get the player for the data. Sorry, to get the data for the player, and then set the money to be equal to whatever the money's value is. Okay? In fact, I don't really like this name now. Now that I've used it a few times, I'm going to say get for. Kind of a funny word, but sort of makes sense to me because now I can say data get for the player, right? Which sort of makes more sense when you say it out like that. And we're going to get the data for the player. And now we're going to get the data for the player, but set the money part of that data to be this value. And whenever you set something that comes off that profile data object, ProfileService will make sure that that gets stored into your storage area for you. You don't have to call save. You don't have to call any extra get or set functions. You can just set values directly off of that object, which is exactly what we're doing here. We're getting that profile data, and we're saying the money is this value. Now, because we're setting up the property change signal, it means we can leave this code as it is, because when the money object that came from the leader stats value is changed, that is going to trigger this event. So now, in theory, we should be able to play the game and test it out. But one thing that you're going to notice here is that there's an error in our message queue here. It says Roblox API services unavailable, data will not be saved. So that means even though I'm using it and my code isn't throwing any errors and I'm storing stuff and I'm reloading it, it's going to start from scratch anyway because it has no access to the APIs. So to do that, you're going to need to go to make sure that your Tycoon thing is selected and go to game settings. Now, if you've never saved this to Roblox before, you're going to get a screen that looks like this, which means you need to save it over to Roblox to be able to access your game settings. Right now, I've been saving it to a file on my local disk. To get access to game settings to enable the API, Roblox has to know about your game. So you must save it to Roblox. This is different to publishing it. You're not making it a live game on Roblox. You're just storing it on their server somewhere so that they can give you access to their backend APIs. Okay? So you can click Save to Roblox, and you can type in all of this information and be ready. Now, I already have a game that is in Roblox, and it's this one. It's the same one. I'm going to overwrite it because this is an older version, and I want to start saving this to the new version. Okay, so you're just going to save the game to Roblox. I'm going to overwrite an existing one with this. But once we have that, we should now be able to go into game settings and change stuff around. But essentially, you want to come down to security, I think it is, and click Enable Studio Access to API Services. So this is probably off when you join it. So you want to turn it on and then click Save. Mine is already set to on now because I overwrote that existing one that had it on. But make sure that is turned on. And now you should see a different message when you log in. API services available. Data will be saved. And this is good because what it means is if I earn some money now, what should be happening is that value changed event is being called, and that's setting it to the profile service. So hopefully when I quit now at 300, I should be able to play again, and it loads it back to 300. Yay! So we are storing data and loading it. And this is the first part of making our Tycoon sort of usable for players that have to log off and want to come back and continue later. Now, one thing I do want to tell you about, and we're going to fix it right now, is something very important. So right now, when you use data storage service or you use the profile service and you give it a name, this name, and I kind of spoke about it before, is unique to your game. So if you make another game and you use the same name, it's going to be a different data store. Great. But it's not unique between running your game from studio and running the same published game live that people are joining. Which means if this thing is set to player data and you publish the game, people are going to be running the game, playing it, and storing data into that player data. And if you come back to the Roblox Studio and make some changes, add some new features, you will also be writing to the same player data as the live service, which can be a problem because if you make a mistake and you sort of delete this by accident, well, you're going to be in trouble because that will also happen on the live server and all that data will then be changed. So we want to be careful about doing that. And the best way that I've found is to use a different data store name depending on if you're running it from studio and you're doing some testing versus it's live and you want live data not to be touched by you messing around in studio. So the way that we can do that is to say profile store name equals, and then we'll do a check. And the check is going to use the run service, which is yet another built-in service in Roblox that you can grab by doing get service run service. And it has a function on here called is studio. And this will return true if the script is being run inside studio and false if the script is running on a live server. So what we're going to do is create a new variable called profile store name. And we're going to make it by default set to a test version. Okay, and we'll use this down here when we name our profile store. But we're going to say if run service is studio, or rather if it's not studio, then we're going to rename this profile store name to be something that is in the production environment. We're going to say prod/player data. And what this means is when the script is going to run inside Studio here, we're going to set the name to Profile Store, and it is in Studio, so it's going to skip that. So it's going to be test player data while testing, and it's going to be prod player data when we've published this game and live people are messing around. So that's good because now, even if I forget something and I end up renaming this and I press play in Studio, I'm not going to mess up the game that is already published and live. So this is an important thing to remember. Make sure that you have a different name when you do Studio and a different name when you do an actual live production. Okay? So now that I've changed the name of the data store, though, if I was to start now, I'm going to start back at 0 money. And that's because I'm obviously storing my data to a different place now. So it used to be just player data, and now it's test/player data, which means all of my information was gone. So I started back from the default. But that's just proof to show you that it works. Like there weren't any script errors or anything. You can rename the profile store whenever you like, but you're not going to be able to grab that old data from it because it has a different name. So that's good. So now we have um, profiles loading and saving, and we have money loaded and saved from that profile. The next thing we want to do is sort of make sure that we're saving whether or not you've purchased one of these buttons. Because right now we have the money saved, but if I spend a bunch of that money on this dropper, the dropper will get reset. So we need a way to identify uniquely each button on here so that we can know if it's been saved or not into our data store. And I don't know of a better way of doing it other than just going through every single button and adding a unique ID. Okay, so we have 5 buttons right now, so I can select them all. I can go down to attributes and I can add something like unlock ID. And unlock ID needs to be set to something unique for each one. That is so we can put this unlock ID into our storage and then load it back out afterwards to know if that particular button was purchased or not. So, for example, we'll just call each one something different. So, this is the unlock button for the walls. This is unlock for our second dropper, I think. This is the button for our upgrader. So, we'll call it upgrader 1. This is the button for our first dropper, dropper 1. And so, this is the button for our big dropper 1. Okay, so it does mean that whenever I duplicate one of these buttons, not only do I have to change the cost, but I have to give it a unique ID. Not ideal, but can't think of a better way of doing that. When I have something like this that I don't really like having to remember to do, if I can't think of a better way of doing it, I at least want to protect myself so that if I do forget to do something that is required, I know about it quickly. So what I'm going to do is add protection to my factories script so that when I look at the template, if any of these have a duplicated name, I'm going to throw an error because they all need to be unique, right? So the way that I'm going to do that is right here, I'm going to loop through each part in the template. Templates children. Yeah, children. And I'm going to check that the ID is unique. So let's just add a comment here. So ensure that no template child has a duplicate unlock ID. Okay, so we're going to have a unlock IDs table, and we're going to fill that in with all the children. So we'll say local UID for unlock ID equals part dot get attribute called unlock ID. And if the unlock IDs table already has this unlock ID, then error duplicated unlock ID found, and then we'll say what the unlock ID was. And so I guess we return there. We want to break out of the loop, but we probably don't want to do anything at all. I'm not sure where return goes if we do it here. Probably skips over everything, which is kind of what we want. Otherwise, we'll shove that unlock ID in the table. Okay, so this is going to be a bit of protection for us if we duplicate a button later on. And oh, table is nil. Unlock IDs, UID equals true. Oh, sorry, yeah. We need a guard clause at the beginning of here. If there's not a UID, then continue. Like, not all of the items under the template have a unlock ID, like only the buttons do. So if they don't, just ignore them. Otherwise, we'll do our check here. So in theory, now this should be fine because we haven't got any duplicate IDs. But if I go away and I rename one of these buttons to dropper1 instead of big dropper1, we should see a nice big error that's protected us. And you can see this has also not worked. So you're definitely going to notice that error and come back and fix it. Dropper1 is the duplicate ID. And we know that because I just forced it into that. So set that back. Okay, cool. So this is a protection against having accidentally duplicated our IDs because we need each one to be unique. And I'll show you why we need each one to be unique. When we buy something now, what we're going to do is sort of set the data for that item to be purchased, right? We're going to add it into our data inside that unlocked items table so that we can load and save that and return the state. So here we're buying the item, we're setting the attribute of the item we just bought to be purchased, but we also want to mark this button inside our data store as having been unlocked. So let's grab a reference to our data script, add that in at the top under where we've done helpers. And basically we're going to say data dot get for the owner, and then set their unlocked items to be the button that we're looking at, get attribute unlock ID to be true. Okay, so now we're going to have stored this button inside our unlock item table that will get stored to the data, and then will come back out when we load it. So let's also buy the item when we join the game. So when we join the game, what's going to happen? Well, we loop through the factory and we find the first one that has no owner, and then we assign it to ourselves. The other thing that we can do is then loop through the items in the factory and unlock them if they are in the data. Okay, does that make sense? I think it does. So this isn't quite what we want, but it's close. So it's going to loop through the factory's children, and then it's going to sort of try and figure out if the unlock ID is in this table, and if it is, set the attribute to unlocked, which isn't exactly what we want to do, but we do want that loop. So it's going to loop through all the factory's children, and then we have to check to see if there's an unlock ID on it. So much like we did up here in our protection code, in fact, we can just copy this and paste it down here. So we'll get the unlock ID from that part, I guess. And if it doesn't have one, then we just ignore it. But if it does have one, then we want to check if the unlocked items has it in it. So if not unlocked, then continue. We just ignore it. Otherwise, here, the item has been unlocked. So let's re-buy it. Okay? So we're looping through the factory. We're checking to see if it's an item in the template that has an unlock ID, so aka a button. If it does, let's check the data. It's not actually items, is it? It's unlocked items. Check the data's unlocked items to see if that's in there. If it's not, then just ignore it because we don't need to do anything. Otherwise, the item has been unlocked. So let's rebuy it. Now, how can we rebuy stuff? Well, the way that it buys it here is it sort of does this bit, which it goes through and it sort of sets the transparency to 0. It sets this to be purchased and it sort of destroys the button. And it also saves the data now. So what we need to do is do this bit, but from the factories. And we could copy and paste it. We could copy this and we could paste it in our factories thing, but we already have a nice way of sharing code. So let's use that instead. We have this helpers module script already. We can add a new function to it. Module.buyItem equals function. And we're passing in the button, I guess, to buy. And then it should look like this. So what is button? Well, it's going to be a button model, but we don't really have that in here. So we'll just say it's a model combined with an item to buy object value. Yeah, object value, like so. And now, does this work? Yeah, I think so. We don't need to do this. We'll only need to do that when we actually press the button. But instead, it's going to hide the associated item, show the associated item, destroy the button, and mark the item that we bought as purchased so it actually runs correctly if it's a dropper. Yeah, so we go back to buttons, and instead of doing all of this, we can just call helpers, which we already have a reference to, buy item, and pass in the button. We don't need to destroy it because the button will be getting destroyed, and we can set the unlock data to true. So back in the factories now, do we have a reference to helpers? No, we don't. So we can just copy that reference at the top here, which is the require statement, paste it in, and say helpers dot buy item, and the item we're buying is the part we're looking at. So will this work? Let's find out. So we can see that we have a brand new game because, of course, we messed around with the name of the table. But we bought a dropper now, and we've earned some money. So let's quit and go home for the day. No, really, let's just reload it again. And now look, we've got that money loaded. We've got that dropper loaded. So now we're making progress in our game, and we can come back and redo it. Oh my gosh, this is going to be great. So now our progress will be saved whenever we quit and rejoin the game. And that's really nice. Now it means people can come, enjoy our game, then leave to have some lunch. And then when they come back, their progress is all saved. And we're pretty much good, I think, in terms of loading and saving. So, of course, when you do your game, you can sort of expand this profile template to have different things in here. Maybe you come and you have bonus items or coins or like other things that you might have want to save the number of times they've logged in, for example. But the basics are there, and you can then use this code and expand upon it for your own game. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, like and subscribe, leave a comment, ring that notification bell, all that good stuff, and I will see you next time.